In the interest of time, when the fire alarm goes off, go out the door over there by the mayor, make a right turn, don't make a left turn, make a right turn, go down the steps and go outside the building. Watch out for emergency vehicles and Randy Vineyard right behind you. At this time, public notice call for a special meeting of the Blount County Board of Commissioners to be held in room 433 at the Blount County Courthouse, 4th Street, Maryville, Tennessee, on Thursday, October 15, 2015 at 5:30 p.m. Pursuant to, in accordance with the authority vested in me by TCA 55105, I hereby call the Blount County Board of Commissioners of Tennessee to meet a special session on the 15th day of October at 5:30 p.m. for the following: presentation by Public Financial Management Incorporated regarding refinancing of existing debt. This ran on the 6th day of October in the Daily Times. Deputy Clerk, will you call the roll?
Baker.
Here.
Allen. Archer.
Here.
Bowers.
Here.
Carter. Carver.
Here.
Cassidy.
Here.
Taylor. Cole.
Here.
Crowe.
Here.
Daly.
Here.
Farmer. French.
Here.
Hedrick.
Here.
Lewis.
Here.
Melton.
Here.
Miller. Here. Monroe. Boone.
Here.
Samples.
Here.
Skinner.
Here.
You have 16 present and 5 absent. You have a quorum.
Thank you. This time I'll recognize Mr. Vineyard.
Thank you, Chairman. Tonight, you're not going to be asked to make any decisions. Last month, you were presented a scope of service with TFM, whereby they would come in and present some information and data to you, for you to have as kind of background information as we get ready to pursue the refinancing of that $79 million worth of debt that will, the 3-year bank loan will expire December next year. So we've got time, but we've got some important information for you all, because as many of you have made me aware, folks have different interests. Some may not want to increase debt, some may want to pay it off faster, some may want to have fixed rate debt, some may want to get rid of swaps, and all those things play off of each other. So I think it's important that we listen to the presentation that Lauren has prepared. And I want to introduce Lauren Lowe to come up and lead us through this. You have the handout in front of you, and we're using this room because it's easier to see audio visually in this format on this screen. There's a number of you that have made me aware that you have time constraints, so to that point tonight, we're going to hold questions till after the presentation's over from Lauren, and you can talk to her after we adjourn. And then I would expect any of you that have anything you want to ask me about it, feel free to do that. And then at this time, I'll turn it over to Lauren. Lauren Lowe.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. I know it's after work hours, it's also dinner time, so I'm very respectful of your schedules, and I'll try to move through this very quickly but efficiently and effectively, and want to be very direct in the information that I'm conveying here. I think first and foremost, I'd let you know that everything in this presentation is based on current market conditions. None of us have that crystal ball to know what the future markets will look like, so just be mindful of that and be respectful of that as you look at this materials and as you think about next steps. So real briefly, I want to cover, and I do think that it might be easier for you all to follow along in your packets, but nonetheless it's the exact same information up here as you have in front of you, just because of visually we have lots of information on our slides. I want to just remind this group of what we were engaged to do. Step back so I can read it myself. We are looking at, when we went into this process working with the county, is looking at all of the counties. Thank you. I think that is better. Thank you, Randy. Looking at all of the county's outstanding debt that you have, and looking at every particular option that could play into this, and really trying to determine what are our objectives and what do they look like when you factor in some constraints and considerations. This takes into consideration the county's outstanding fixed rate debt, the county's outstanding variable rate debt, as well as there are 4 interest rate swap agreements, which are contracts We've also factored those into this analysis. So with that, and also being respectful that the county has an adopted debt management policy, we looked at the objectives to be reducing the variable rate exposure to 20% or as close as we possibly can. Also looking to reduce the amount of variable rate debt that you have outstanding once those swap contracts go away or mature. So the contracts, and I'm going to explain that a little bit further here, have a stated maturity date. And once they're gone, what does that mean for the county's variable rate debt? So the concept behind those contracts are supposed to protect you from variable rate interest rates moving around. Once they're gone, what does it look like? Also, looking to create a more level debt service structure. And the best way I can explain it is looking like a more of a mortgage style, right? Where you know what your payment is every fiscal year, and for the case of a mortgage, every month. And also, a consideration how Public Chapter 766 Acts of 2014 are referred to from the state legislature as the balloon indebtedness law, how we need to think about that for anything the county does going forward. This is a recent law passed by our state legislature and during the last session that has some limitations on how local governments can structure debt going forward. And everything has to be we have to think about that, everything we look at doing with debt, because it may require us to go to the state and seek approval, and I can't, you certainly just don't know what that would play out to be. So trying to be mindful of that as we look through all options. So let me just give you a quick recap of some of the things that I feel like is important for us to set the stage up. So as of the end of fiscal 13, the county had 48% exposure to variable rate debt. You had 5 interest rate swaps, and 7 of your outstanding pieces of debt were loan agreements through public building authorities. They were obligations of the county, but they included a third-party public building authority. In late 2013, the county successfully removed the need for several of these third-party agreements on 2 of those series of the 5 that is referenced above. And there is actually savings associated with not having third-party providers associated with a PBA, a liquidity provider, and a remarketing agent. So those 2 pieces were moved directly under the county's hat.
How much?
I don't have that specific number right now. I'm certainly that we can get it after this discussion. So, so that was moved in 2013 for administrative purposes. So now all of the debt those debt pieces of debt are under the county's umbrella. And just be mindful that it was always the county's obligation. It was just done through a third party. And that debt was moved to U.S. Bank for 3 years. So that's the debt we're discussing. That's one of the pieces of the debt that we're looking at. We're looking at all of them, but that's the one that really kind of has started us to start this educational process and discussion with you all. So that was December of 13. So that is a December 2016 timeframe, and I know we're well in advance of that, but we want to make sure we give everyone ample opportunity to look through all options and considerations. Then in early 2015, the county refinanced another one of the PBA loan agreements. That was a variable rate piece of debt with a swap. So you successfully terminated the interest rate swap agreement and issued fixed rate, fully amortizing like mortgage style debt in early 2015. The result is as we are today. As of today, the county has 39% exposure to variable rate debt, and you have 4 interest rate swap agreements and 4 remaining pieces of debt. Now those are all fixed rate, but there's still 4 remaining with PBA loans. All right, so a little bit more on the existing debt that we looked at. That's a lot of information, and now I see it on the screen. The blue's not very flattering, but nonetheless, we actually gave you a line by line of all the pieces of debt that the county has outstanding as of at the end of fiscal 15. So it goes through each series of bonds that you have, their tax status, the amount of debt that was issued, the date that it was issued, and how much is outstanding. A couple of notes here as we think about the scenarios that I'm going to walk through here with you in just a moment. There's a piece of debt that is county debt. You're not going to be wrong, but it is paid for by the hospital. The hospital has historically paid for it. We have no concerns that they're going to not pay for it going forward. So for the purposes for what we're thinking about of the county's debt and your obligation, we have excluded that piece of debt because we refer to it within our world as that self-supporting. It's supported by a third party. We have noted the series of bonds with a one that have loan agreements with a public building authority, still county debt, but just wanted you to know the differentiation there. And then you'll see I'm kind of going in chronological order here. We have the 2 and the 3 footnote, which is related to the 13B bonds. That's the ones I referenced earlier that were now are with U.S. Bank, and they have all 4 swaps are on that one piece of debt. There's a line item here, the Series 2010 Qualified School Construction Bonds. The amount right now is $11.3 million. As we go through some of the scenarios, we did not consider touching that piece of debt. That was done through a state-pooled program, and it's extremely effective and very low cost of capital, and we would require the state to kind of undo the entire pooled program if we asked to refinance it, and it wouldn't make economic sense. So just know that as we go through these scenarios. So here's what the composition of that debt looks like. You have right now about 61% that is just true fixed rate debt, and you have 39% exposure to the variable rate markets. So that's where, kind of going back to the objectives, it's not in compliance with the looking to achieve that 20% level that's in your debt management policy. Same set of information, but now thinking about what does your debt service payments look like in the composition of what's fixed rate and what's variable rate. This is what, when we talk about debt service, that's your principal plus your interest, your payments that you are making. Fiscal 17 through and including 2037, at that point there would be no more debt outstanding, so it's a 20-year window that we are looking at the county's debt profile. So this is right now, and this, if you did nothing, you never issued additional debt, you didn't do any refinancing, this is what your debt payments would look like going forward. I would draw your attention, and I'm going to cover it here just in a little bit more, is that the portion that's gray, which is variable rate, tends to increase over time, and I can actually explain to you why that is and show you what it looks like. So here's what this is, that reference I want to explain to you. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to take just a moment and kind of walk through this, if you'll just stick with me. So the top graphic is a representation of actually what is the 13B composition, the bonds that we're referring to. That's the only piece of variable rate debt you have, just so you know, but it's a large piece. It's also the piece with the 4 interest rate swaps. So the blue bars along the top, and we'll talk about the bottom in just a minute, the blue bars along the top is how your principal payments are scheduled to be made. So not interest, but actual principal payment schedules, right now associated with the 13B bonds. There is a tiny sliver in 17 and 18, no principal payments through and including 2023. It goes to a level of $5 million-ish, down slightly again, and then principal payment of close to, it's actually over $9 million. Goes back down, no principal payments are made in 31, and then we have another row of increasing principal payments on the back end. So that's how that piece of debt is supposed to be paid out. So then the gray bars represent the swap contracts. The swap contracts they have an assumed payment schedule that should or usually ties to what you're actually paying out. But in the case of the 4 swaps that the county has, it assumes, these contracts are assuming that you're making those principal payments right in here, when in fact you're not. So you see the misalignment between only having gray bars and no blue bars on that top graphic. So what this means is, if you fast forward all through this time, these contracts are assuming you're making payments, but you're not. And you get to here, all your swaps are gone as of 2031, leaving all of this debt back here, which is about $45 million, has no contract on top of it. So it's just variable rate debt in the market, meaning it's subject to interest rate volatility with no cover or protection from a contract. So what I added at the bottom was just a demonstration for you all to understand if those swaps were perfectly tied to the debt that they were scheduled to protect or to cap the interest rate, this is what it would look like. They would be paid out exactly the same over time.
Or go back. Can you do that?
Sure.
Say that again.
Sure. Oh yes, sorry. I'm sorry. It's a very, very important point. So let me not stop. Let me keep going. So if the contracts themselves are put in place so that when you're making payments here and interest rates move around, whatever rates do, that you have synthetic fixed rate debt, meaning that your rate is covered by contract. So your rates of make it up 4%. You don't have to worry about where the variable rate market goes. So that contract and how you're actually paying out, they're not aligned with each other. So the contract's assuming you're making payments when you're not. So the contract's assuming you're making all these scheduled principal payments, and the contracts just go away. By the way, they just naturally mature over time. In a perfect world, and how most synthetic fixed rate deals or contracts are done, the contract and the bonds align with one another. So they pay off in the same exact time frame. In this case, our swap contracts pay off by 2031, and we have this amount of debt outstanding with no contract to protect it from interest rate volatility.
So would you ever advise that we would be in a period from 2019 to 2023 without paying any principal payments in this rate environment?
What was the time frame? I'm sorry.
Anywhere from 17 to 23, 2017.
As a matter of fact, the state law is actually put in place to limit the fact that not paying principal. So, and in most cases, I don't have local governments that don't pay principal.
So no.
Okay, so that leaves us to, now that we have all this, lots of background material to kind of, what options did we consider as part of this? There's a couple consistent themes through the three scenarios we're presenting to you today. One is with a heightened sense of focus on trying to reduce your exposure to the variable rate interest rate market to 20%. You have a policy that was adopted and approved, trying to adhere to it, 20%. Also, we're respectful of the existing debt outstanding. We did not want to increase your debt by a large amount. So total debt outstanding would not increase by more than $5 million. So with that being considered, this is the refinancing that we created, or restructuring, to try to adhere to those constraints. Now, what we've called it is level debt service. So truly like mortgage style, same cost of the same debt service cost, if you will, every fiscal year for the next 20 years. That comes out to be just about $14.32 million per year. So in these graphics, I'll leave that one for just a moment because it's pretty self-explanatory. But in this one, you see the red or orangish line represents currently what your debt service looks like, and where it drops off and then it comes back up. The scenario that you're seeing in front of you, the level debt service scenario, it is a flat debt service cost for the next 20 years at a $14.32 million. I will say that from my end, the takeaways is while this looks awfully attractive, there's some component of moving the needle down in terms of debt service per year. Right here, you've just absorbed future capacity because you've now put in additional debt where you did not have debt before. And this is a representation of what the debt would look like in fiscal 17 after doing this refinancing. You would have the 20% exposure to variable rate, which is in compliance with the policy. This has a cost, a present value cost of $12.46 million. Because what you've done is you've taken this debt right here and moved it back here. So I wanted you all to be able to see a level debt service structure where you know your debt service obligation every year for the next 20 years.
So is that 12 point? Well, I'll wait for that.
Okay, scenario 2. What we refer to as accelerated debt service, and let me explain. This one is, what we try to do in this situation is to be mindful of what debt service costs are you expected to incur in fiscal 17. We can tell you what it looks like about right now. So if we take that into consideration, it's about $15.69 million. And if we held that as the constraint, so it's actually above the number we referenced in the previous one, it's higher than the 14 number, we tried to push as much as we can and keep a ceiling of 15.69 for as long as we can, still complying with 20% variable rate exposure and not increasing the debt outstanding by more than $5 million. So here's what it looks like now. Keep in mind that we still have this red line that's giving you a representation of what your debt looks like right now, your debt service payments. So now you see it's more similar to what you're expecting to pay, and then when you get to this point right here, it's taking some of this stuff back here and moving it right here. Same takeaways and very similar consideration to earlier is it does give you some nice consistency for the next 15 years, and you've moved a little bit of this up to give yourself a little bit more capacity in the back, which before you kind of moved away from all the capacity. The 20% of variable rate debt outstanding is captured in this scenario. This one has a cost, but it's not the same as the previous one because you push more debt towards the front. So this one has a present value cost of about $4.61 million. And there's a slide in the back that shows all scenarios on top of each other, which is a good way to kind of see them all together. All right, so then to really kind of shake things up, let's talk about this traditional debt service structure. I have heard and have discussed with different folks within the county about kind of what kind of going back to your point earlier, how debt is paid off in other places. So what I want you to note in this particular scenario, what we call traditional debt service structure, is that what we took as our benchmark is we went out and Moody's Investor Services, which is one of the 3 large credit rating agencies, they have a database of all the credits they rate nationally. We have a subscription to it. We went in and we looked for similar size entities like Blount County that have similar ratings. You are a AA2 by Moody's. And we looked at, one of the metrics that Moody's includes in their database is how much debt is paid off in 10 years. So we can actually pull the sample set and look at the median of how much debt is paid off within a 10-year period. And that is kind of the standard of what we refer to in the market as how much principal, not interest, how much principal are you paying off in 10 years. So in this case, we had tried to adhere to that makeup. And from the information we pulled from the Moody's database, it says that approximately 75.9% of principal is paid off in the first 10 years for the similar size entities to Blount County. As a frame of reference, if I start in fiscal 17 and take it 10 years out for the county and we do nothing, you're paying off 48%. So this is what we're referring to as the traditional scenario, just because we're using that as a benchmark. So in this case, similar to the previous 2 scenarios, 20% variable rate debt outstanding, and also not increasing the par by or the amount of debt outstanding by more than $5 million. This one, when I talk about shocking the system, this is what I'm referring to. Is that we've got this red line of what your debt looks like that's going to be paid out. Once you move all of this up to adhere to this 76%, and I'm rounding up, it's 75.9, it creates this much more of a sloped concept, and it actually saves you money on a present value basis, but I would be very clear in that takes your debt service payments of a $15+ million number to north of $20 million. So I want you just to know kind of, this is a frame of reference and for you to understand that this is what a third-party credit agency is reporting on behalf of similar entities to Blount County. So, and that, in this, it's a $65,000 savings, $65,000 savings, but I want to just kind of take a moment and let you all look at this, and then looking at the scenarios together will be helpful here. All right, so here's the scenarios all next to each other, and that's a lot going on. But in this case, the bars represent what your debt payments are going to look like from here for the life of the debt through 2037. The the yellow line represents that scenario 1, where we just kept the payments flat for the next 20 years with a cost of about 12.46. This is present value dollars, so today's dollars. In comparison to what's here on this one is the red line, which shows where you kind of move the needle up a little bit to that $15 million number, so that you're more kind of keeping your payments as flat as long as you can, and then it drops off. And then scenario 3, which is moving principal up as far as you can to comply with that 76% reference amount of principal paid in 10 years. And that one is at an actual savings, albeit it's minimal, and the impact of ability to do so should be considered. So, with that, I'm going to kind of cover with you all. This is just for informational purposes. I will say that the next steps, at a minimum, the county will begin to review all options for the Series 13B bonds with U.S. Bank, given that that has a stated agreement that expires in December of 2013. The county will also look to have discussions with the Office of State and Local Finance, which is the division of the Comptroller's Office, as it relates to Public Chapter 766, the Acts of 2014, because this is a new law that we need to adhere to and understand and think about as we look at future options. And then, of course, a presentation of any proposed refinancing or restructuring plan will be prepared for the County Commission to review in the public meeting. So with that, Randy, we have the closing remarks.